Right. Just getting a live connection. All right, we are now live
on all apps.
on, well, three of
Platforms?
them, on
okay.
Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram.
Guess that's good enough.
Hello, beautiful humans. Let us drop in and connect with you. We're telling the people we're live here with Alex and Ahaumna. And we are coming on to share some updates about what has been happening the start of December. And maybe we'll twinkle in some of the insights that have been coming through, just the activations that have been coming through this whole year. That being said, we had some successes.
I'd say.
Yeah. Successes. Yeah. Over the last 5 days. When was the 8th? What's today? Today's the 13th. So the 8th through the 12th was a lot of shifting and really directing focus in on the lower dimensional consciousness of the planet. So we're talking dimension 1, we're talking the gate 1 of the planet. We're in, basically that is off the coast of Malibu in the ocean. And then coming up here to Mount Shasta, where we are right now, which I'd show you the beautiful mountain that's right next to us. However, it's snowing incredibly hard and you cannot see it. So we've been here and doing the flow, doing the frequency, and just wanted to come on and give you a little bit of an update on what's been happening and how it's been going and the successes that we're having for humanity, and also just sharing. Yesterday when I was scrolling the internet, I was just like seeing all these posts about the 1212 portal and all these different things that just really felt like a bunch of like woo-woo nonsense. I don't know. That's the best way I can describe it. It was just like woo-woo nonsense, not really having any like tangible, informative information that can actually like guide people to understand what is actually happening on the planet. What energy was coming through, why it was coming through, how it was supporting us. So,
I would just say that, just expound on that, is that generally when you see, and it's obviously not just 1212, there's 1111s, and there's just anything that lines up, right, with Gregorian calendar and your standard clock, right? What you do find commonly with these, like either global meditations, and obviously all these things require your own discernment, but I guess the small comment I would just make is if you ask the people that host those events, or whether they be websites or wherever, like what that actually means, then, I mean, it's like...
they often don't know.
Yeah, that's number one. It's usually just, at the end of the day, it's almost like numerology, which is cool and sometimes helpful, but it's like, well, there's a 12 here, there's a 12 here, and it's also 12 o'clock. At least on the East Coast, you know what I mean? And it's like, well, but what does that really mean? And
most numerology is the base 10 numerology anyways. So it's also fallen mathematics.
So really what we're trying to get at is people gravitate or feel drawn to these numerical sequences because math and geometry are obviously a real thing, a real consequential thing. And it is really important when it comes to consciousness and just how things work, the mechanics.
Because everything is math and geometry. And all of existence is a sequence of numbers and shapes.
Which govern like how elements come together, where you are. Just think about it, you're always in a 3-dimensional space as an individuation or a collective. If you're in a 3-dimensional space, you have an X, a Y, and a Z axis. It's like geometry 101, right? And if you remember that from school. So with that, you are always plotting or pointing where something is in 3-dimensional space or having a relationship with. So that's why we're always saying like, well, everything is math. Well, because again, it's about how do things combine together in a 3-dimensional spherical, it's really a spherical domain. And so this then gets into what that has to do with like sequences like a 12, 12, 12 or whatever it is really, where I think there's going to be obviously a lot of 2s in February next year, 22s and 2s and all that kind of stuff. So
a whole lot of 2s in February of 2022.
Yeah. So, and I'm sure there'll be other meditations on that day and whatnot, right? But basically this has something to do with what's called a cosmic clock. So the real importance of kind of the larger mission here is called the Christos realignment mission. When we say Christos, that's actually referring once again to actually geometry and a code that basically allows for perpetual quantum exchange, so perpetual life force.
And we spell that with a K.
Yes, and there's a reason it's spelled with a K.
CH.
And that just, I mean, if you say like, it has more to do with the inaudible sound tones. And those inaudible sound tones, that sound then governs and creates specific forms or cymatics, specific geometry. So that sequence of actually 7 sound tones, which have to do with the 7 sons of God, actually, the creator, if we're talking like biblical or religious, like that phrase. But that is actually how a sound template or code allows for unlimited creation, but within a domain. So it's both a confined, it's not a limited domain per se, but it's a specific boundary within an unlimited source field. So the minute you go to create a specific boundary and you want to grow things inside of those spheres within spheres, how do you ensure that all of it stays in one unbroken connection? So the source consciousness field stays and it slowly downsteps itself, but it remains interconnected, and you can keep on creating eternally inside of those domain set structures so that nothing just falls apart. So that's a little bit of the back end on the Chris code.
When you like bang your hands on the table, I bet they hear it on that thing because the tone is right there. Okay. So maybe.
Yeah. So anyways, so the Chris code has very much a lot to do with the time clocks. And the time clocks are really a good way to look at it is like, if you have a sphere for a second, just visualize a sphere, and you cut that sphere in half, okay? Then you would have something that looks like a 2-dimensional circle, right? Because you're just looking at, if we were drawing this on paper, it would obviously be 2 dimensions. So if you're seeing a circle with like a bunch of little clocks on it, 12, 6, 9, and 3, I think I did that right for their image anyways. And there's obviously the other points too, when you slice that in half, you'd have something that looks like a gear or a clock or a template. So then if this is just one sphere representing maybe say the largest domain boundary, okay? And we actually refer to that as an Auger bubble, just for your own interest. So then inside of the other sphere there, we'd have other spheres. If there were other spheres in there, when we imagine that 12-point clock here for a second, the way that bubbles actually structure themselves to then create different domains, eventually you get galaxies, universes, that kind of thing, individual bodies. But you'd actually have spheres on each of those 12 points. You'd have a sphere in the center, and you'd have several arrayed in here as well, but they're all offset at different angles. So you have spheres within spheres on different point sets, all having different angular relationships. So like, for example, see where my finger is over here? What if just like over here for a second, you have one of those clocks or spheres with all full 12 points, or vector lines, vector event horizons?
So let me pause you for a second to like make sure that everyone's understanding before we go even deeper.
Okay.
Basically, like, let's say this is the largest sphere, and I like to imagine it as like Russian stacking dolls, right? So spheres within spheres within spheres within spheres. So when Alex pointed over to this point, that's another sphere inside of the larger sphere. And all of those spheres, the large one and all the little ones that are inside, have this 12-point clock that we're using as this example. So right here on the face of the larger sphere, there's a 12-point clock. And then all of the spheres within it also have this 12-point clock.
And that has to do with your like 12-point clock, like the clock on my wall. That seems so random and weird. It definitely does seem random and weird initially, unless you make the connection between spirals, how everything spins. In physics, everything spins, everything is a spiral. And that there's a connection between how a spiral grows and harmonics, like actual musical scale, and having like 12 different frequencies in an octave. Okay, and how actually spirals can grow different ways, and how they can be in harmonic resonance with other frequency bands and just keep on growing and growing. So for example, you have like the Fibonacci or the golden mean ratio, right? There's another spiral as well that most people don't talk about called the crystal spiral. So,
and I would just recommend that you go watch Organic Intelligence to learn about the crystal spiral and the Fibonacci, because that is something we're not going to dive into right now in this talk.
Correct.
Because we already went into that in the other. You got to go get your battery charger here for this computer. It's going to die. 1 second. Just got to plug in our devices. Let's see here. So I know that Alex just went on a little bit of a tangent when we are going to be talking about what has been happening, and he's going to be.
I'll be wrapping it up. Yeah.
Tangent.
So basically, like, it does back into kind of all these other sort of missions that we're on, so to speak, because we're trying to actually get things back into alignment. So if you had like a vector line and we were on this probability over here, we were on probability 12, but down in here on, let's say, the planetary or the solar system or the galactic level, that larger time cycle, we're trying to angle that one back into.
I think that I might be able to give a good example of what you're trying to say here. So let's say that this clock has 12 at the top, right? And all the mini clocks inside of it, all the mini spheres inside of it should all have 12 lined up with 12 of the larger clock, right? So that would be like our north node. So all the inner domain should all be lined up. 12 should be touching 12 for infinity inside of this domain. Now, what's happening is in our system, because we're in this distorted, false, fallen, whatever languaging you want to use, system, our 12 is not lined up with the 12 of the larger body that we're in, right? Let's say like 6 is lined up with 12, right? So what he's talking about when he's saying vector lines and all these other things is basically the 12s are not all lined up, which means that the communication from the larger host body, Earth, that we're in, is not able to actually happen, because you need all of those lines of 12, the vector lines, as he's calling them, matching. And that's not what's happening. Right now, it's like the mini ones are like this, and the bigger one is still pointing to 12.
But everything is spinning. Everything is always spinning and circulating. Spinning. So that's why actually these timing alignments are important, because you might try to go from a planet to a solar universal. They each move and cycle at their own rate, their own spin speed. So you have to know what that spin speed is, what angle you're on, at least to do the grid work we're talking about, but on a larger, and then participating with the other so-called collectives or guardians or teams on the larger tiers. So when an actual flow comes through, you have to know when, let's say, a 3 and a 3 and a 3 are lined up, or a 12 and a 12 and a 12 on all of those larger bubbles. Okay, so like universal and higher, actually much, much higher, all the way down. And those only happen at specific times. And then there is also things that can be done by opening up what's inside the planetary Templar to actually make probability shifts or octant shifts. So these are also certain alignments that happen where you can actually take a big leap and leap around the so-called clock and come into a more larger alignment, so long as you know on those much larger domains, when there are those opportunities, those pass-through currents that pass through the alignments, where then you can run the wave live with and you're on the right grids at the right time, and you can actually facilitate opening that. And the reason we can do that is because of what we carry in our actual blueprint, in our genetic code, and why we downstepped ourselves into these bodies to specifically support the Templar down here. But this planet is very special. So it actually contains within it, but really within Eartha, the larger that it's hosted in, one of these large remote access those levels and actually influence huge, vast levels of creation down here. So that's why we also have so much support, because we're part of that team, one unbroken chain that goes up and down the scale. So what we're actually pulling off down here in density 1 is profound in terms of it's going way beyond just some planetary influence. It's going way beyond a solar system or even a galactic plane influence. That is why the mission has been so important and been drawn out for God knows how long. I actually know how long. It's a very long time. So that's what we'll kind of update you on. It's good to have a little bit of background on alignments and cosmic clocks and things like that, because much of the work we've been doing is very much about being at the right place at the right time in order to open and activate and align these sites with some of the larger systems. And this, of course, is also an important aspect of the future, if you will. And I'm not going to get too far into that as far as what makes you look oriented towards the future versus the past. You have to use certain levels of your bodies and fields to do that. But this work also is about keeping a viable route or a future timeline now available for continued evolution or continued ascension process. That is mainly what this realignment mission is about. So making sure the north node and the south and all the other positions is aligned with action. This is the unbroken chain right here, aligned with Sirius B north node and aligned with M31 north node, and then also up into the 12 point of what they call Aramatena Lyra, which is that orientation there. Now down here, we're going to now update you on in density 1 what specifically some of the things that have been done, which is, of course, going to be a much larger discussion and probably will leave some questions. But on our recent travels, and there's stuff we were doing pre this to prepare for the travel phase on the West Coast here.
I just want to stop and if you can hear us on YouTube and Facebook, we cannot get the video stream working again. So if you want to see us, come over to Instagram where the stream has not been interrupted by the technology failing, and that's just at Ahaumna. So we'll keep it rolling because it looks like people are still on there. However, it doesn't look like you can actually see us anymore. So hopefully you can hear us. Yeah. All right. We'll see. We'll find out. We're still here though on Instagram, so that's groovy.
Cool. So we recently went out to Malibu, and Malibu is, and there'll be also a, I will just say sidebar comment, inside of the 13th dimension, we will be actually showing a very sophisticated grid site map that will cover all kinds of different sites, of which there's many, and different lines going vertically and horizontally, and at diagonals on the parallel side of things, and the interface in different areas. So that is kind of cool to see, because you might get a sense of like where you've traveled before, where you really love, where you don't like it all that kind of stuff. And that's important because we always come in here like with specific keys that we hold, and we're not going to go into like what are keys, but suffice to say it is related to your DNA template, to your morphogenetic blueprint. And we come in with these different sets to actually open different sites that we walk on. And that, again, has to do with what we were talking about before, because we're actually forming alignments or co-resonance between other aspects of ourselves in different timelines that are in those spaces. So that's really cool. So we're always doing some kind of cross-time work.
So basically, this year we've been on a planetary mission where the activations that have been coming through have been this probability shifting energy that Alex was talking about, where, 3 has been in alignment with 12, and the activations that were coming through were trying to basically jump Earth forward to bring it back so that the 12 and 12 are in alignment, right? So that the Earth is in alignment with the greater body that the Earth is being hosted inside, called Eartha with a U. And the influx of energies that have been coming onto the planet, a lot of people have felt these energies and not really understood them. Every time an activation comes through, I'm always perusing the social media thread to like see what people are experiencing, to see what's happening in the Earth, because basically almost every activation that's come through there has been a direct response from the earth as well, including most recently this massive snowstorm and like even like tsunami warnings and things like that where we were at, and we'll get to that in a moment. That being said, like to just kind of summarize the last pieces of this activation sequence that's been happening this year, it has been all about reclaiming the Earth's alignment, right? And jumping the Earth forward in probability to a probability where the Earth has never not been in alignment, right? And basically like blending those timeline probabilities together so that humanity and everyone that is within the Earth and everything within all of it can basically now start living in a more like pristine alignment and co-resonance with the planet. And actually like all this talk about ascension and all these pieces and all these things that, you know, a lot of what we talk about is how the new age is really a very deceptive place because it gives a lot of the truth yet sugarcoats it or doesn't give the actual mechanical information behind it. There's a lot of false light within it that is basically trying to, you know, sabotage people from actually growing and attaining what they're here to be attaining. And like the talk about ascension and all these things, it's like, you know, it's the earth has not even been in a co-resonance where ascension would really even be possible unless someone was devoted to doing these types of activations at all times, like devoted to it. And it's not just like showing up for a meditation and like getting the energy and then like having all these things happen. Like ascension is not an automatic process when you're in a fallen system. It's a process that you have to actively engage and learn and grow and like reorient into your entire DNA to achieve. So what we have been doing with the Guardians, with a ground crew team here, there's been a team of humans as well that have been running these activations with us. Not only our pod, I've noticed there's about 2 to actually 3 pods, basically like our crew working with the Guardians running the activations. Then we have Kim's crew. Kim, what's her last name?
Gojin.
Kim Gojin. She's working with the same Guardians that we're working with, and she's more working on like the I call it like the administrative. Like she's more like in the administrative role where she's like actually like changing the system.
I would almost say like, yeah, we're assisting in the higher commissions that you have. Like you just work more deeper behind the scenes. So we might be like actually turning on the hard drive of a computer or rebooting the hard drive. Kim and some others might be like working on a lot of software glitches, like a problem with an app and like all the cleanup on that level, which is super important. Those little micro details.
Yeah. And then we have a very silent group that are also working with the same Guardians that are basically have been really like a lot of our star family that have been not actively engaged in the flame running of the activations this time. They've been more like in visionary roles, I would say, where they're actually like confirming and seeing and sensing and affirming and like the process that's happening. Some people that are very good seers have been seeing what's been taking place and just kind of like, you know, the whole thing when you're in these types of like mini cloisters, it's like you're doing this really massive work and there's a part of you that's like, oh man, like I like, is this really taking place? Like, is this really impacting? Like, is this being felt? Like, how is this going? And we look for confirmation from the earth first, because the earth will immediately respond with what happens. We look for confirmation from the sun. The sun immediately responds. I mean, like every single activation, we've had massive, massive, massive solar flares immediately come after like off the Richter solar flares. And everyone's like, the sun is solar flaring. And we're like, actually, the sun is responding to the activation of what we're doing and is basically giving us that's like the probability is actually shifting in those moments. And then we have Kim, who's actually a very active vocal presence in it. Like we're very vocal presences about what we're doing. At least now we're getting more clearance to basically be sharing more. After the 21st of December, we're going to be able to give a lot more of the details on what's actually been happening behind the scenes. Right now, we're still in this place where, we got quite a bit of interference for the work that we were doing here in Mount Shasta. We almost didn't even make it here to actually do the work that we're here doing. So there's just so many different pieces when you're like working behind the scenes on the hardware. So we've been going through since June of this year, basically bringing on the new gate sites on the planet, the host gate site in South Carolina, and then linking in all the new gate sites to it. And then certain gate sites that are a part of the, we'll call it old system, that have been compromised and shut down, like Malibu site, the Kauai site. These have been shut down sites. We've been certain ones, Egypt as well, that were meant to be a part of the new gate system as well. We had to basically reclaim them into the the Christic mission, reclaim them from being hijacked essentially by the false AI matrix, and turn them back online, right? So from the activations that came through, that basically turned on this stealth mission of these 8 inner suns to run this new planetary gate site that happened in South Carolina. Then we had one of our beings here, one of our human aligned friends, star family, go to Egypt. We ran the frequencies with them in Egypt to reclaim that gate site. Then we had the Kauai gate site that we reclaimed. And then most recently, on the 8th through the 9th in the morning, it was basically a 24-hour activation, where 8 activations were coming through over the course of 24 hours to reclaim the Malibu site. And now that one was one where we got a tremendous amount of interference, because basically once we reclaimed the Malibu site, then we were able to come to Mount Shasta and actually start working on what Alex was talking about at the beginning, where the rod and the staff are out of alignment, right? So the 12 and the 12 of the bigger domain are not in alignment with where we are, and actually reclaiming that alignment, which would fundamentally eradicate this virus from our system, right? So Malibu is all about dimension 1, right? Gate 1. This is like the in our physical manifestation, this is our resources, right? Our ability to be resourced, our ability to be abundant, our ability to be secure and have safety and security, our ability to thrive. And basically that site has been compromised and hijacked since the fall of Tara, right? So we're talking, what, millions of years?
Depends, but maybe say 500 million. It's in the hundreds of millions, a long time ago.
It's been a very long time since the first dimension, the gate 1, has been compromised and hijacked and shut down, right? So that has basically locked this system into a reality where there is suffering, tremendous amount of suffering, and a tremendous amount of lack, right? Not actually being able to be resourced, right? Resourced means we are receiving energy from source. We are continually fueling, right? So this whole death spiral, right? This whole, body aging, growing, and dying, which is not natural for the human body, is a part of this, a part of this corruption here. We're talking about human suffering, like deep pain, deep primal fears, right? If you've ever taken your consciousness and rested it in your root center for long enough, you will start to see and meet the deepest core fears: fear of dying, fear of being abandoned, fear, that there's not going to be enough, that you're not going to perceive your mission, and all these different types of things, right? That has basically held this planet and all life forms within it into that paradigm of suffering and lack.
Yeah, and I would just say that you kind of have to see some diagrams to understand this, but
and we will be sharing lots of diagrams and things like that inside the 13th dimension when we.
But the first also is when you might say, like, well, the first, like, you mean like my root chakra? And it's like, yes, on the physical body, like this physical body, because you have many bodies, that would be the general location, sure. But then when we talk about, well, on a planet, right, which looks spherical, well, you actually are spherical and you look exactly the same on that structural level as the planet, hence diagrams. It's just that within the sphere and within these creation codes, you can create all kinds of forms, of course, built upon that core structure. That's usually when we're saying like the mechanics. It's when you're looking at the structure of how things build into many different forms, but on its core template structure, things look nearly identical because they have to all connect to one another. And like a fractal, grow big or grow small, micro, macro. So at that base one, if you look at where that one and the planetary one connect, there's a connection between that base and down into Earth core. So normally that's called the planetary biofeed interface system. So we actually get perpetual creation currents, all kinds of different flows up through the core of the planet that we use for manifestation. We actually draw those up through our counterclockwise magnetic Merkabah spiral to actually draw it up at a specific ratio. But we're also drawing down from 12. The issue is that when we say things are out of alignment or fallen or even reversed and all these different terms, for now, the easiest way to, catch a piece of that and say, oh yeah, of course, is the misalignment of the planet, right? So you may or may not know this, but the planet is tilted around like 23.5 degrees. I always get confused because there's also the other part of the field is back the other way, but I believe it's around that. And you can go Google that and look that up. But basically, if you think about those spheres again, so it's like, well, if this particular body sphere, and what you're looking at visually when you look at matter, to not get too far into how that works with like spirals and vortexes and stuff like that, so you can actually see something as solid, what's actually light. There's a whole sequence of that. But basically, when you look at something, you're looking at one dimension below. So anything that you see is physical, including your body, is actually, in this case, D2, dimension 2, but you're looking at it from 3 or 3.5. So when you look at the planet, you look at it from space, again, you're seeing the same body as far as you're looking at the telluric elemental base, or the D2 part of the planet. So that part of the planet is off alignment. Obviously, it's at a slight tilt. And if you look at like the sun's if you look at other planetary orientation, you'll see that some planets maintain the vertical north-south axis alignment, and then some actually are a little wonky. They're having some troubles. Earth has had that misalignment for quite some time. So when you look at the underlying templates, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, all these different what we call signet sites, which are related to gate sites as well. There is a part of that actually got split or knocked off its staff axis from about 11.5. 12 is at the top, and 11.5, there's a very complicated thing that happened, but that's the part that's split at an angle. So it's now off at an angle. It's not aligned with the 12 and the 1. It's off, okay? So that has to do with, again, being in alignment, okay? And when you're in alignment, you allow the perpetual life force or conscious intelligence to have an unbroken connection, to flow all the way down, to stay at one with source. So we had compromisation on many of these levels that were out of alignment. Now, what's interesting is we still are technically out of alignment, because if we were back in alignment, it would have been like weather chaos and we would all probably be dead. So we're still off there a little bit. But what's interesting is part of the mission now was, well, eventually, actually, the planet will come back to correct itself in a pace that won't just wipe out all life fields rapidly. Mm-hmm. That will happen because things are on the right track. But for now, what we're also doing is, just because the D2 body, right, just because that solid body is off, does that mean that there's always going to be some cutoff? Not necessarily. So part of the mission here was using deeper levels of the field of the planet. So of course, there's not just dimension 2, physical. They're all the way up the chain, so that the outer radon or outer light body monadic, but there's also all kinds of inner bodies as well that become more based in spirit or etheric matter. So we're actually opening up and interfacing with these gates, and not just us, but a large team, for quite some time, back to these other sorts of gate systems that basically go back inwards. Instead of going up in the dimensions, it goes inwards. So they're like macro. They're huge. So what that means is that, oh, well, just because we're out of alignment and this is like that, we can still have a workaround. Instead of going up and trying to run into that barrier, we can actually go back in. So if you don't see a diagram, it's like back in, where is that? And there is actually, it makes a lot more sense when you see a diagram and you see it where you're oriented, like if you were standing right now. So it makes much more sense. So we're actually, there's ways, certain gates that have, and grid sites that have special connections that go like transharmonically or intraspectra, which is like going back in through time. So there's ways that actually you can reroute around some of these broken roads. It's like if you literally had a part of the highway that was broken and you took the service road. The service road was always there. It was just like not active, not needed to be used, super ancient. So you can still cross it. So that's basically what we've been doing for quite some time here, is opening these like little alternative avenues that are part of a much larger body set or a much larger domain set. So like gate 1, and there's a lot of like, there's a few gate 1s. This particular one has a special connection to what we call the hub domains. And we'll go into more details on this, but really quick, the simplest way to kind of get a visual for a hub domain is like if you were out here on the clock and you were in, say, the 1 position out here or wherever you want to be really, the hub would be, actually, let's stick with 1. Okay, so like if this is the outer Stargate 1 over here, and there was a wheel of different gate sites, if it's a wheel, where would the hub of the wheel be? The hub cap, or the like a bike. The hub is in the center, and all the spokes or the vectors go along that way. So we're actually going into the hub where you also have other gates. So there's like an interface that have been put in for quite some time between the outer one, let's say, and this hub one. So the hub allows you to jump to all kinds of different places in the cosmos. You don't have to work through the outer gate sets into these larger and larger bodies. So these are kind of like some of the most important sites, and basically the main reason why we just don't continue to fall, and that we're not just like never ever going to be able to come back into alignment and come back into source. So there's all these life fields that are waiting and have been on this kind of mass evacuation now to move through these sites, now that the passageways, the corridors, that are actually in alignment and open again. Yeah.
So to just summarize that piece, like one of the reasons why Earth is so important is because Earth has held open this gate that allows for people. So basically, like when you descend, right, when you begin your journey down into consciousness, right, which is really going inwards, right, you're going into consciousness and having these experiences in this, dimensional reality that we're in order to ascend and return back to the outer domains, right, you have to actually go through certain gates, right? There's a path that you have to take and go through certain gates. Well, a good deal of those gates have been shut down and hijacked. Earth has maintained, what is it, a solar gate?
Universal in the core.
In the core of Earth, which is the universal gate 3, Stargate 3, in the core of the Earth is one that has not been compromised. So basically, all life forms have had to actually come down into Earth in order to actually ascend to the outer domains again. Okay? Which is why this planet has been so prized and why we have so much intergalactic life fields surrounding and protecting, and also like engaging and working with the DNA of the planet and working with like all these different hybridization all the different things that have been happening. Like why Earth has been such a hub focus is because it's, basically been essential for people to actually exit back to the outer domains, right? And the languaging of being trapped in a system has definitely been pretty accurate, right? Because then once you got into this system here on Earth, like, okay, sure, say you like descend down into this inner domain of the Earth to go to your ascension into your outer domains. Like once you got here, though, you completely forgot that you even came here to ascend back into the outer domains. It was like wiped from your memory, except it was more like trapped in your memory, right? It's like bound up inside of your body, this reason why you even came here to begin with. So as we have progressed, right, more people that have been able to maintain a certain amount of memory, right? Because of their keys that they're holding, which is basically like a key that unlocks certain doors, right? Keys in your codes that you've picked up throughout your existence, throughout the missions that you've been on and the activations that you've gone through. Like more and more people are coming in that are able to carry these codes. And a lot of times, like a lot of the, speakers of the information are actually walk-ins who were able to come into a body. And when you're able to come into a body later on, not when the body is born, when you're actually able to host a soul in and have a walk-in experience, that soul that comes in is able to maintain the memory that they're coming in with, right? So like Yesha is a walk-in, yeah, and the different aspects of self that are able to actually come in and maintain the memory and then assist people through the process of reclaiming their memory to remember why they came here to begin with and go through their journey of true ascension, which is actually a very like delicate dance, right? It's a very fine-tuned dance that has a choreographed steps and sequences and flows of energy. It's not just like, the way that the new age like makes it out, just like, oh yeah, I'm like gonna put all my energy here and just ascend, and like, all these different pieces that really don't actually describe the choreographed dance and steps and sequences of energy unlocking and gates unlocking in your hologram and your light body matrix as well, to bring yourself, because you're inside of this, if we go back to this outer bigger clock, this outer bigger sphere, the earth is inside of it, and then you're a sphere inside of the earth sphere inside of the bigger sphere, right? So because you came into this earth sphere, you also took on that distortion where you're out of alignment with the 12, right? So basically, like, now we're at this point where the activations that have been coming through, we're like working on the planetary level to shift the planet slowly, because if we rapidly brought the planet back into pristine alignment, like all life forms would just be wiped out, because the nature here has compensated, just as our inner biome compensates when we have a virus, right? Like, how many people live with Lyme's disease or Epstein-Barr virus or streptococcus virus, all these different viruses, and then the body compensates and learns how to live with these viruses. and it's not easy to live with the virus. However, the body can continue to live, right? And basically that's your nature learning how to adapt to, this corrupted system, because nature is, basically continuing to try to survive. So our nature of our greater planet has adapted to these misalignments. And if we just brought it completely back into alignment, we would see massive, massive planetary changes that would, make it not possible for life to be here for a period of time. And we will also, now that we're doing this slowly, as we're doing it, we are seeing, like in Malibu, we basically went through this journey, and anyone who's in the 13th dimension, towards the end of the month, all these activations, you'll be able to go through them as well. These are all given out as bonuses to anyone who joins the 13th dimension. All the activations that have come through this year, and then all the ones that are coming through next year. Basically, we like started an energetic tidal wave, like tsunami wave. And immediately when the activation started, there was an earthquake at the gate site, that right when we like pulled this energy down, there's an earthquake. And next thing we know, we're getting tsunami warnings, like for LA where we were, like physical tsunami warnings. And we're like, okay, that's interesting. It's just like this confirmation of what we're doing on the energetic planes. It's like when we opened up that volcano in Kauai, and the next thing we know, all these earthquakes and all these fires start happening, because there's always going to be a response. And we're trying to do it incrementally so that the response isn't huge. And yes, like, people are going to transition during this period of time. That should be expected by everyone. If you are not expecting people to be transitioning and exiting out of the planet right now, then that is something that you really need to start dropping in with, because otherwise it's going to be very traumatic for you when, people that you love, care for, or, just the deep connection that you have to humanity, and people start to transition and utilize these energy to actually free themselves from the system, if they're not going to be able to continue to live on the planet as it changes, right?
And again, what's being made available here is transmigration of consciousness. Mm-hmm. So in other words, due to a lot of distortions. People come in with no memory of where they were or who they are, all that kind of stuff. And that's fascinating. We'll discuss that in 13th dimension in detail. But that also, where were you before, right? Before in the body? It's the same, it's kind of the same thing as saying, like, also, where are you going after, right? After life or after you transition. Part of the importance of practices that allow you to take your consciousness here and project and journey with other aspects of your spiritual anatomy is that you actually know when people transition, where they're going now. So there is, again, a very specific structure. So part of it is also with the ascension process is practicing actually moving your consciousness into different spaces. And there are different alignments that are here. If you are watching this right now and you're resonating with this, you're one of those individuals that is here helping to actually be the bridge and make the leap, make the shift, actually practicing shifting. So when the time is right, and that'll be different for everybody, you'll take the rest of your full physical atomic structure, or you may drop the body and actually take all of the memory and the experience, as much of the quantum as you can from it, go through a proper Bardo sequence, or you may assist others in this process as well after they've actually crossed over. So this is a much larger discussion we go into another time too about death and that whole kind of thing. So when you see these actual evacuation waves, people leaving the planet so things can come back into alignment, it's kind of like, oh, okay, not such a big deal. I know where they're going. In fact, some of those places I've already gone several. I can go anytime I want, sort of thing. I can pop over there, say hello. Hey, you just transitioned. That was crazy. Then pop back into this probability again. You are a bridge that goes trans time.
Because as our, what the trajectory of the planet is on right now is one of a massive evolution. And, there's going to come a point where it is going to be absolutely essential for you to maintain life on this planet by having your higher strands of your DNA back online, right? That is going to be fundamentally essential in order for you to continue to live on the planet that is emerging, right? And what Alex is saying, this ability to transmigrate, which basically means like taking my body from Earth and going to visit, say, my relatives that have been taken to, let's say, median Earth where they're healing, and I would be able to go with my body, visit them, see how they're doing, and then come back with my body, right? Or let's say the ability to fly, right? All of these different types of abilities are sequences of your DNA that are coming back online, right? And in order to stay here, you'll have to be bringing those back online. So the piece about like, yes, a lot of people that we care about and will need to exit because they're not going to be at a place where they're actually going to be able to bring the technology of their DNA fully back online in time for the big shifts that are happening, right? And that doesn't mean that we never see them again or whatever it is. It means that they're going to carry on life elsewhere, and we will be, so long as we continue our journey of bringing the technology of our DNA back online, able to go and visit them, right? So this is why there can be different like lenses of how you actually look at how people are going to transition off. And, it's not the end. There is no end ultimately when it comes to consciousness and life and evolution. There is a question here about, does the work you are doing affect the 200-year accession timeline Ashayana Dean speaks of?
Yeah, and I would just say that in that group, we also haven't had a very specific update from the Guardians, even from the rest of that shield of work, as far as if that year is still the same, because it used to be 900 and then it was longer before that, but we kept on taking leaps. Some timetables got accelerated. So the long short answer is, who knows at this point? It could be, I would say that talking with several people in the group, doing our best with the mechanics, our feeling is actually there'll be a very, very long window open now. To not get too far into it. However, while there is a longer window open that will be very stable, because new windows and doorways are opening, is that still, though, that brings a huge influx of energy. And that changes the matter bases down here very, very quickly as well. In other words, you can slow some things down and some things you can't slow down. So I believe it actually may fast track certain opportunities, abilities, and things. Moving into next year and the following year, people will have to really upshift their molecular elemental base quickly because of the influx of energy that's now coming back in because of certain alignments that were made. But at the same time, life fields can continue to come through here and out, move in and out for quite some period of time. So yeah, we think that actually extended it way beyond 200 years, although the current surface population and current life fields on the surface may go through an upshift process very quickly. And again, these details will get into greater clarity, I think over the next year or so.
There's another question here. Thoughts on Neoplatonism and Syncretism?
Well, if Neoplatonism is like talking about the Platonic solids, if that's what you mean, and some of these Platonic solids are geometry creating part of the light field or structure here, based on like Pythagorean, Fibonacci, golden mean, base 10, and different musical theory and things like that. So you could say that Neoplatonism is definitely related more to part of what we're trying to shift in terms of the structure. Although, there are many that revere those structures and geometry as sacred. Of course, everything in all creation is sacred. Mm-hmm. It's just about learning to discern, like there's this structure in geometry, there's this structure over here, this does this, and this does this. So like even in studying Neoplatonism.
And I would just say so to just kind of give a little bit more to what Alex was saying there, like, yes, all of life is sacred, right? Because, and I talked about this on my podcast with Adam Roa, basically like when we return back to source, like all experience gives value, right? Gives value to consciousness, learning, and growing. It's like if you think of a moment in your life where you made choices that you would look back on and think, I would not make that choice again. And maybe you've even shamed yourself, judged yourself, blamed yourself for those choices that you made because it hurt someone else or it hurt yourself or whatever it was. And now in the future you, version, present moment, you look back on that moment and you see how that moment changed and evolved and transformed you in a way that you've now opened up to more love and appreciation, and you would not make that choice again, right? So all experiences are sacred. Now within that though, we have like two different paths, right? This false artificial path, and then the natural organic path. And in the natural organic path, we are constantly regenerating energy and being receiving energy from the source and growing and evolving in energy. Whereas in the artificially constructed path of this false fallen system, it is siphoning energy from us, right? And actually trying to maintain and keep us in these false fallen systems in order to siphon energy from us and basically be food for these systems, be energetic food for these systems. And, all of it is sacred. All of it is still a part of the greater source consciousness. And now at this moment where we have a very interesting opportunity because we are living in a planetary system that is actually shifting out of being like hijacked by this artificial matrix and into its organic intelligence again. Like we get to actually see both coexisting, which is like, it's like basically like your PhD degree. If we want to like take education to like the quantum, like basically life on Earth right now and actually awakening and remembering right now on the planet is getting a PhD in consciousness and discernment and able to actually choose like, oh, wow, I actually recognize all of this distortion. And I recognize how this is actually feeding off my energy and is actually looping me back into this system continually, like this karmic muck of reincarnation here into this fallen system. Like, oh, wow, I'm not going to choose that anymore. I'm actually going to shift my energy over here and I'm going to work on doing the choreographed dance to help me free my energy from being stuck in this, Vesica Pisces self-feeding system where I'm just like food for who knows what, right? So just to elaborate on that just a little bit before we go further.
Yeah. What else? Yeah, Shasta is a little bit to explain. So,
So from
Yeah.
Malibu, we ended up
Yeah.
here in Shasta, and basically like yesterday, the 12/12 from 11:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time until about 3:45 Pacific Standard Time, there was continual pulses that were coming through the planet through Mount Shasta, because where Mount Shasta is, it actually is linking in through the misalignment, right? So the misaligned rod actually comes in through Mount Shasta, and basically we're talking, what was it, M31 that these pulses were coming in through. So a cloud city that is above Mount Shasta, and if you're not familiar, there's a lot of cloud cities around that are basically civilizations of etheric beings that live in clouds. And you can, at some point in your journey with your plasma body activation, things like that, like we'll go to cloud cities during the 13th dimension on activations. People who have gone through activations with us already, we got assistance from the cloud cities in the Malibu activations. They helped us. Cloud cities can actually help to bridge in higher frequencies because they're operating a few dimensions higher than what we're operating here on what seems like the surface of the earth.
Yeah,
right?
so there's like spheres within spheres. So again, this is just dimension 2 of the Earth's surface you're looking at. There are many other surfaces and other spans and spaces that go up, or quote, up in the atmosphere. And there's like other civilizations, life fields on different tiers. So when we say like Cloud City, well, are they like dancing on clouds? Not necessarily. We're just saying like, as far as where you would see different layers of the atmosphere, there's other different layers of the planetary body. So to us on this surface, it would say, oh, they appear to be in the clouds. Well, that's like, okay, that doesn't even make complete sense. Like what layer of the clouds? So of course, then we'd be getting into miles and how far up. And so there is actual maps and specific structures.
They're much higher than like where planes fly.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you get like, is it in the thermosphere? Is it here? Right. And these are like interface zones between this and Eartha, and there's links, unbroken links in spheres that go all the way up Sirius B to M31. It's very cool. So you can basically project these places. You can do different sorts of healings in these places while you're still here, which give you a lot of advantages or acceleration. But in those larger levels that we're talking about, they are not suffering in these misalignments. So they're able to send certain types of energies that are normally supposed to arc all the way down here. And they're using that in like the recent thing to flush certain things out and to bring this rod. So this is the rod that runs horizontally east to west. And there's the staff. That's the original cross, so to speak. So things are tilted, right? So the rod that goes this way is also tilted as well, which also throws off a whole bunch of stuff, mercopically speaking. So in this case with Shasta, that rod that goes through, what happened is basically there ends up being these like false alignments when the tilt happened. So it wasn't just like, oh, this tilt randomly happened to this random amount of degrees. No, it specifically went to a specific alignment that isn't supposed to happen. So that allowed, it's a long story, a lot of other things to come through that aren't supposed to come through. So this recent one was about clearing out what had been running through the rod from another place where there was a false alignment.
So when we were talking about how many of the different gates have been basically shut down on the planet, and that choreographed dance of bringing energy through in order to, ascend out of here or come into the system, like when these energies come through because of this misalignment, we actually have to usually bend the energy, right? Bend the energy to get it to go where it needed to go. So for this activation, if we weren't physically here running the flame, what would have just happened is it would have just kept coming in through the misaligned rod and staff, and it wouldn't have actually gone where it needed to go. So we came here to then bend that to South Carolina, to the gate site that's there, and then bend it down into the gate site that just got opened into the ocean outside of Malibu, so gate 1, right? So basically bending this energy, and then underneath the planet, this stream of the Crystal River opened up underneath the planet. So in all of the tunnels that have been used by all of these beings to live and do their thing underneath the surface of the earth has been cleared. And we basically bent these plasma arcs underneath the planet to clear that out. And this every 5 minutes from 11:45 to 3:45, this energy was coming through M31 down into Shasta and was then arcing through and clearing out. So yesterday when you saw like memes of people saying, oh, well, this is an opportunity to like clear karmic cycles and clear timelines and clear all these different things and connect into your highest alignment, yet no one actually tells you why that's the case or how that's the case or what's the mechanical piece behind that. Like this is why that was actually happening, because of this work on the ground that was happening to bend these arcs and to actually clear. Because then once we had the flows running, what the final pulses did was it brought down and it actually sucked out of this system, sucked out the distortion from this system. And that's really what has been happening. And now the next activation that's coming through, which is in like a week, the 21st, which is normally a moment, all of the equinoxes are actually moments that have a tremendous amount of distortion because the fallen system, rod and staff, are aligned with these basic black holes, right? These black hole systems that open up around the equinox? Yeah, equinox, not eclipse.
Equinox and also solstice.
And solstice.
Happens 4 times because there's 4 points on the main cross.
So they normally line up with these black hole systems. So the 21st would be the next time that it would line up with this black hole system. So in that moment, that's basically the last piece of this 16 phase activation cycle that has basically been, or 15 or whatever the number would be, since June of this year through December. And that last piece is actually going to be this higher level creation code that's going to be coming through to kind of wrap it up. Yeah. And we also have to hop off here because we've been waiting for the snow to stop so that we can get on the road. And if Logan's still on here, we are coming. We're just waiting for the snow to stop. It's supposed to stop at 11 now. That being said, thank you all for coming on and joining us and dropping in. I know that we kind of went through a lot of different topics very briefly because we just felt the energy to come on and share with you. And we are going to be going so deep into all of this and really doing and running all these activations that are continuing to come throughout all of 2022 inside the 13th dimension, which is our year-long intergalactic mystery school that starts in January. The last day to sign up for that is January 7th. So do go to the link in my bio and check it out. Send me a message if you have any questions or you want to chat with me about it before joining. Again, that is an entire year of really going deep into all the mechanics, going through the activations, really stepping into, you know, the biggest thing that we've gotten, the feedback that we've gotten from the people who've shown up so far for this first phase of the activations is basically like finally feeling aligned with the mission. Because so many of us here are wanting to connect with our mission and are looking outside of ourselves for what that mission might be. Like, oh, maybe I'm supposed to do this thing on the planet and like start this business and help these people and like do all these external things, when really our mission is like an inner alchemical process of learning how to dance with the energy, learning how to dance with the mechanics of creation, learning how to dance with the symphony of life. And basically we're going to be helping people to remember that dance
and do it. Lots of
and
practices.
then actively do the dance. So we love you all. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for riding the waves of this tangent that we just went on.
Yeah. Till next time.
Till next time. Much love.